Vauban just got his little retouch, rework, whatever you want to call it, and I will say, minus one major miss, I can confidently say, as a long-time Vauban player, this is one of the best QOL, quality of life, buffs I have seen in my lifetime. Tesla NERVOS has been made infinitely easier to use properly. MINELAYER feels incredibly intuitive and more powerful. Vauban has always had the tools for success since his first rework, but using those tools was absolutely clunky as can be and unintuitive to the point of misery. I mean, like, Bastille had a unit limit, the amount of enemies that could be in it. Like what is this, 1997? Insane. Vauban has incredible utility, and 3 of his abilities scale with enemy level in terms of damage, which is really solid and allows him to stay ahead where other utility frames do get relegated to the support role after their damage falls off. He can still feel a little bit clunky to this day, but that's kind of the nature of a tactician frame, especially in the breakneck speeds of the current meta. Everything in Vauban's kit kind of looks a little funky until it all comes together. Vauban has so many good tools, and now that he can actually execute on them properly, I feel like now would be the best time to make a guide. I'm absolutely over the moon with the adjustments they've made. Love it to death, and I really don't think he needed the full-on rework. I think this was good. There's maybe 1 or 2 changes I would make, which I'll talk about later. And yeah, Vauban feels great to play. Hope you guys enjoy the guide. Like and sub, blah, blah, blah. Let's get to it. So why would you want to, or maybe not want to play Vauban? Let's talk about the upsides and downsides of playing this Warframe. That way you can get a better picture of kind of what's going on here. Starting with upsides, Vauban has strong scaling damage. Vauban's damage doesn't fall off at higher levels in the same way a lot of other frames do, and scaling directly with enemy level means that power strength doesn't need to be jacked up to 1,000,000, and this gives Vauban a more diverse modding experience. Vauban probably has some of the best CC in the game in terms of accessibility, and almost certainly in terms of just sheer distance covered. Vauban's CC is incredibly strong, and he can cover insane amounts of the map, rendering enemies useless, following up with debuffing or grouping. The way you use his tools is incredibly varied and feels good, but a lot of his CC is some of the best in the game. The only problem being CC is less valuable, but we'll get there when we get there. Vauban has really unique ability deployment and a skill ceiling. Vauban is easy to learn. He has a pretty low skill floor, but all of his abilities are tied to his balls, which are thrown projectiles that have an arc and deployment conditions, meaning he can put a lot of abilities in places where they normally shouldn't go based relative to where Vauban is standing. He can get a lot done from different angles. He doesn't have to look exactly where his abilities going because they have arcs. It's a little bit of an unappreciated part of his kit, but I think it's really strong actually, especially in more defensive settings and more objective-based settings. In terms of weaknesses, Vauban has a lack of built-in defenses. Outside of his CC and the armor from Bastille, Vauban struggles to keep himself upright quite often, especially in settings where he can't really tactically position himself. I actually find myself using walls and cover on Vauban quite a lot. It's a little bit amusing. It doesn't always feel like I'm playing Warframe when I play Vauban. It feels like I'm playing like Rainbow Six or some shit. But in game modes that require like constant repositioning or constant movement, maybe something like Disruption, Vauban can struggle a little bit, especially if you're not very skilled with the frame. Overguard. Vauban's kit would be really dominant in an era of pre-Overguard Warframe, but we don't live there anymore, unfortunately. In a game so lathered and oiled up with overguarded enemies, his inability to defend himself properly just gets multiplied. Like, he has a much harder time. He's already a little bit squishy, but a single overguarded enemy gets through, or those ancients, God forbid, you're going to have a rough time, as enemies aren't going to be affected by your CC, which is your main way of keeping yourself alive, as I'll explain. Lastly, Vauban is clunkier than a lot of frames in the game. Vauban in his golden settings, like defense or whatever, is incredibly easy and intuitive to play. But anything outside of his optimal environments, there's a ton of ability spam required, knowledge of tiles and tile sets, how his abilities interact specifically, and general game knowledge both on Vauban specifically and just Warframe in general. You'll need all of that in order to apply his kit and execute his kit outside of its best conditions. But once you get good with it, it really becomes an upside. This is kind of a situation of just needing to be more skilled with the Warframe to get the most out of them. Not something that's not very common in Warframe, in my opinion. And real quick, for acquisition, if that makes you want to play Vauban more, the blueprint is in the market for credits, and each part is available in the Nightwave, quote-unquote, free, it's a free battle pass essentially, and that's going to be 25 Nightwave credits a piece, leading to a 75 total. And I believe the blueprint in the shop should be like 35,000 or something like that. A prime does exist, Vauban Prime exists, but it's quite it's actually one of the primes I really wouldn't recommend getting. I think in terms of crafting materials and actually getting the parts right now, he's very expensive. I do believe he's being unvaulted soon, but just keep that in mind. I think getting the base frame is very accessible. Again, totally up to you. Let's get started on Vauban's kit, starting with his passive. Plus 25% additional damage to enemies affected by CC. This buff is multiplicative and incredibly irrelevant. Honestly though, I would just treat it as a plus 25% damage buff overall, because it's super rare you'll actually have to put in any like active effort. So much of his kit CCs enemies, and you're just constantly dealing more damage, and a passive with more damage equals good, in my opinion. Pretty simple as. Vauban's first ability is Tesla Nervos. Vauban juggles his balls, deploying up to 4 automated electric rolling balls that latch onto and shock enemies, opening them up to easy headshots. Up to 4 balls can exist at once, each with a certain amount of discharges before they eventually expire, individually one at a time. Each discharge has a 1-second cooldown, stunning enemies within a radius. This ability is mostly only useful for staying alive through CC. The electric shock effect is quite potent, I'd say, and helping energy economy with Archon Stretch, which every Vauban build really should have, as he wants the range and of course will want the energy. It's not very glamorous, I'd say. You'll need to recast these fairly often, as the AI for them is a little bit dumb and can be slow, both literally and metaphorically, as they'll just get caught on random geometry all the time, or just fall behind you, or connect with enemies that you are no longer engaging with, so on and so forth. However, once we get to Tesla Bank, the augment for this ability becomes a centerpiece of Vauban's kit, and honestly can go on to other frames through the Helminth system, as this is Vauban's ability he gives to other frames through Helminth consumption. Tesla Bank marks enemies to explode once latched, dealing their HP outwards as an explosion. This leads to very competent, indefinitely scaling damage, which will be a theme in Vauban's kit actually, as it deals damage based on HP, which scales with level. Basic math stuff. The real problem with this ability is armor, as the damage dealt is HP, not EHP, which is like effective HP, armor times health, and that is not used here, just the health, meaning armored targets are going to deal less damage than they are truthfully they are tankier than the damage they'll deal, and if you're dealing with a whole faction of that means they're going to take reduced damage, which is a problem. Luckily, Vauban has an armor strip, which we'll get to pretty soon. So it really shouldn't be that big of an issue in the long term. But against enemies who don't have armor, so Corpus and Infested mainly, this augment will have Vauban nuking rooms like every couple of seconds. I swear, Tesla Bank is so good. In my opinion, it is must take on every single Vauban build. Just an opinion, but a very educated one. Vauban's second ability is MINELAYER. Vauban has 2 mines he can choose from based on hold casting or tap casting the ability. In the menu you can invert these binds, but I think the default key bindings are best: tap for Tether Flechette and hold for Vector Overdriver. Now these used to be 4 separate abilities that you had to juggle through, similar to Quiver, which was extremely annoying. There is really only one big loss with these orbs being, kind of conjoined into 2 orbs instead of 4, but that's Vauban one-trick shit. If you want to know about it, you can ask a comment, but I'm not going to talk about it here. The tap cast, Tether Flechette orb, deploys an orb that fires out puncture procs. These little nails, they force proc puncture, have decent damage stats and decent crit stats, and that damage scales with enemy level, which means the damage doesn't really fall off against tougher enemies, which is super good. Additionally, there are little energy wires that deploy that will drag up to 2 enemies towards the Flechette orb turret. If a enemy is affected by Vauban's 4th ability or killed, the orb will seek new targets with those wires. Nails are affected by universal weapon bonuses like Arcane Arachne and Nourish. There's a bunch of other things that get affected by it. That's kind of a different conversation, but basically you can buff these to do quite good damage. Up to 4 of these Tether Flechette orbs can be deployed on the battlefield at once. This orb is able to deal, I'd say, fairly reliable damage. Puncture procs are solid, reducing enemies' damage they deal and increasing the damage they take. Solid. And the tether allows you to extend your domain over the map while synergizing with the rest of your loadout. So you have some effective CC here, and you can also buff the rest of your CC in your kit by using MINELAYER. It's pretty simple. Hold casting deploys the Vector Overdriver pad, leaving a little arrow on the ground indicating its existence. Upon connecting with the pad while moving in the arrow's direction, Vauban and allies gain bonus movement speed and bonus weapon damage for a duration. The weapon damage is multiplicative, it's quite solid. I wish the movement speed was parkour velocity, beggars can't be choosers. And also, when you connect with the pad, you'll be flung forward a certain meterage based on your power strength. So pretty solid. This is a really competent damage buff, decent movement speed boost, not too bad. Up to 4 of these can exist on the battlefield at once. Also, the Vector is capable of flinging enemies forward, which is pretty funny, but when the Tether Orb exists, using the Vector isn't really necessary to manipulate enemy locations. This ability is really solid. The rework makes it feel so much better to use. It's a net gain on the ability by far. The flechettes do serious scaling damage, and the tethers reduce your need to use clunkier parts of Vauban's kit. Vortex, which we'll get to that in a minute. But of course, that damage and speed from Overdrive Vector, really valuable in Warframe. You never don't want that, right? I could do without the flinging forward, not a huge fan of that, but there's ways to get around it, not a big deal. Each individual component of MINELAYER isn't great on its own, but getting this much value out of a single ability makes it feel very versatile and potent. You just need to kind of know how to get value out of all 4 parts. Again, this used to be 4 abilities. Now it's 1 ability with a hold cast and a tap cast, and each of those also do 2 different things. So it really just understands a higher level of understanding with MINELAYER. The ability isn't amazing, but it is nowhere near bad, and just requires a little bit of finagling to get used to. Vauban's 3rd ability is Photon Strike. Vauban throws one of his balls, again, weird trend, which follows up with a massive orbital strike at the thrown location. The damage here is quite solid, but most importantly, just like the Tether Flechette Orbs, and just like Tesla Bank, scale with enemy level, meaning the damage will always stay fairly competent. It's blast damage as well. It's in a decent radius. It's really good. This is where a lot of Vauban's damage will come from, provided that you play the caster playstyle. Additionally, my favorite part, the Photon Strikes deal twice damage, or double the damage, to enemies that possess Overguard, making it easier for CC immune enemies to be affected by the rest of Vauban's kit. Super strong. Additionally, if you have a Vortex out, those Photon Strikes, the orb thrown by it will basically magnetize into the Vortex and basically ensure easier targeting. Photon Strike is a really strong ability. But for me, it's just, I'm not a Vortex user, and I would say these 2 abilities are one of the stronger synergies within Vauban's kit, and because I don't use Vortex much, I don't elect to use much Photon Strike, but the damage is serious. That's also a fun blinding ability if you don't like your friends that much. Photon Strike's good, so you've done the math by now. Tesla Bank, Tether Flechette, Photon Strike, all scaling with enemy level. Super good, super competent damage. And so on top of being a utility and CC focused frame, Vauban is able to have his damage keep up relatively well, where other frames that are like more CC kind of power balanced would usually become supports at this point. Photon Strike and other abilities similar to it in Vauban's kit, the way they scale, allow Vauban to deal a ton of damage. Speaking of tons of damage, Photon Repeater allows for free casts of Photon Strike and multiplies the damage by sending down 2 additional strikes when you hit at least 5 enemies with a Photon Strike, which is something super easy to do with Vortex or those Tether Flechette Orbs I mentioned earlier. Photon Strike is just damage, but it's a lot of it. It scales really well, and it's AoE. So Photon Strike, while being a little bit lame, it does a lot for Vauban, and if you're doing the caster playstyle, you really should aim for it. And if you're using a Vortex playstyle, you should really aim for it. You can combine it with things like Viral Tempest, Smite, and you make really funny Vauban builds. I'd say this is one of Vauban's more defining abilities in terms of like the bit, memes and whatnot. Vauban's 4th ability is Bastille and Vortex. Vauban, like he often does, throws out one of his balls that creates the Bastille containment field with tap cast or a Vortex on hold cast. Bastille begins suspending enemies in the air in stasis for easy headshots where they cannot harm you, draining their armor and giving Vauban and his allies bonus armor, flat armor, which goes up to 1500, which is a lot. It isn't always the most useful on Vauban, as he isn't really a health tank, but I'm certain you can make some sort of setup with persistence and healing work here if you've done that, which I know some of my commenters have for sure. Leave it in the comments, please. The armor buff also persists after exiting the Bastille field, which makes it a lot more reliable. Stuff like Arcane Battery, Primary Bulwark, these are reliable synergies to use on Vauban, and I strongly recommend it. Again, persistence if you want, of course. That's a good armor synergy, but I would say it might be a little bit harder to make work. But this turns Bastille, an ability primarily defined for its CC, become a damage ability or an energy econ ability, which is very funny to me due to the armor it gives. After the duration of the containment field completes, it performs what I refer to as an auto collapse, leaving behind a vortex at the spawned location for a few seconds after expiring. Vortex, the hold cast, simply sucks enemies and pickups up in range towards the center. This is an amazing grouping tool, but needs to be used mindfully in a lot of settings. You see, Vortex has no line of sight check. Most Warframe players complain about line of sight checks, but in this case, it's the inverse. Enemies that it can't see and can't see the Vortex they'll still be grabbed by it. It'll basically just pin them to walls in adjacent rooms or behind structures. It's super annoying, and it's going to make it harder for your team to function within high KPM reliant game modes. For open areas, Vortex does a killer job, and you can adjust ability range to make it feel better to use, but we'll talk more about that in the modding section. Likewise, Bastille containment fields can be what I refer to as manually collapsed, which is done by holding down the Bastille keybind, which collapses all active Bastilles into vortexes and resets their duration, unlike the auto collapse, which only lasts a few seconds. 4 Bastilles and 4 vortexes can exist on the battlefield at once, meaning 8 instances of absolutely beating the shit out of enemies and making it so they cannot interact with anything. The augment, Enduring Bastille, extends the duration of Bastille per enemy kill within it. Not bad at all. This augment also includes Old Perpetual Vortex, any unks remembering that one, which allows you to stack vortexes on top of one another to make one singular vortex with a massive duration. I believe the cap is like 3 minutes on the duration, which is quite funny. And it makes it easier to manage on those vortex-friendly maps. That's the only reason I take it. I personally don't care for this augment. Recasting Bastille is just super easy. And I'm not really a manual vortex user. I prefer the few-second vortex, the auto vortex as I call it. So the Perpetual Vortex doesn't have much meaning to me, but Enduring Bastille is a good augment. It's just not the one for me, which is how augments really should be. Bastille and Vortex are Vauban's most difficult tools to truly get the most value out of, but their floor is still incredibly strong and it's an easy ability to use. Your utilization depends on 2 main factors: the game mode you're playing, the tile set you're on, and ability range. Bastilles are mostly okay to throw around all willy-nilly as long as you're not like in a defense mode slowing it down, but vortexes can seriously mess up enemies and it's really annoying, makes headshots miserable. So try to be tactical and kind of like analyze the tiles that you're on, the tiles that surround you, the tile you're currently in. We'll talk about when we get to the gameplay point, but it can really mess up enemies and make the game a little bit less fun for you and your teammates. You can use things like an atomic cycle or like summons or specters or whatever to prop open doors. There's all sorts of technology, but really just be mindful of where you are on the map and what your vortex is about to do. Do things like pinging distances away to understand how far your vortex is going to suck. And if you optimize vortex properly, it is a very strong ability, but I think when used poorly, it's one of the most frustrating like abilities to have on your team. If we're talking Helminth, Vauban's got a lot of options here. Breach Surge just gives you like BOGO bullets essentially. Each time you hit one enemy, Breach Surge will fly. Really strong in single target weapon setups to amplify kind of the strength of that and kind of try to get rid of the weaknesses. Blood Altar is very funny. This is probably, if I were to do health tanking, armor tanking, persistence Vauban, Blood Altar is probably how I would go about it. Very funny. Eclipse for either the weapon damage, but more likely for the damage reduction. Really strong. Evade, definitely just my favorite subsume in the game, but Bastille does make headshots incredibly accessible, so if that's something you want, you should absolutely totally go for it. Null Star for the DR plus Neutron Star, super strong. Nourish for energy economy plus viral, just overall a good Helminth, and you don't build too much strength on Vauban, so Nourish ends up being pretty good, along with it being able to buff your Flechette Orbs, so super strong for that reason. Also, the Flechette Orbs plus Nourish plus like other things like Arcane Arachne, you can actually get pretty serious damage on your Flechettes that way, so not bad at all. The Helminth that I use is Pillage. Pillage basically helps with the armor, very slow armor stripping of Bastille. You don't need to build that much strength, and with Pillage plus Aegis, you're basically unkillable as a shield tank, which like whoop-de-doo, you know, any build can do that really. But for Vauban, it's synergy with Bastille, allowing you to easily full strip the main counter to Tesla Bank, which is armor, is really strong, I think. Pyrotechnics for the ragdolling effect, the way Pyrotechnics targets things like in Vortex, pretty strong. Roar for more damage if you want that. Totally get it. Smite plus Photon Strike makes for a very funny airstrike build. Strongly recommend that. Spectral Rage plus Spectre of Siphon, the augment for it, allows you to become an energy printer for your team or for yourself, which is really solid, but it's just not really as desirable of like a thing anymore. If you're doing it for yourself, that's one thing to spam cast, but if you're trying to like buff your teammates and be their energy vampire, it's just not, we're not in like 2016 anymore, unfortunately. Tempest Barrage plus Vortex or plus Bastille, or really in any kit, Tempest plus Viral Barrage, really, or Viral Tempest rather, very broken. Strongly recommend. This allows you to, again, quicker strip, like I mentioned, provided you have the shards, and the viral priming is super useful. Theros Strike. If you are a big fan of Vortex and you don't care about Bastille, Thorough Strike is your best friend. You will full strip enemies, and then with the augment, absolutely murderize whatever you have put in your Vortex. Thorough Strike and its new augment, which I just forget what it's called. Oh, it's here. Theros Lethality. This makes the case for being a Vortex-only Vauban player. If you are that, Thorough Strike is going to be your best friend. Thermal Sunder, if you decide you want to use it with Bastille for the damage and the augment, totally an option. Zelda's Whisper, more damage, always useful. Webbed Embrace, also more damage. It synergizes with Vauban's kind of like area domination kit, but I would say that there's like you're kind of competing a little bit with kit design there, but it's just more CC the better. Not bad. These are the options that I would personally try, and most of them I have personally tried, but my favorite at the end of the day is going to be Pillage for sure. But somebody, God, please try Blood Altar Vauban, okay, with Bastille armor and Persistence tank. I really need to see that. Leave it in the comments. When we're talking Archon shards, there's a lot you can do here. Personally, I just do a little bit of everything. Equilibrium is really good for energy economy. Hardcore velocity is good for moving around. Casting speed is good for casting abilities faster, and then 2 ability strength. Honestly, this could be duration. This could be literally anything you want. You can go purples for the primary damage if that's how you're doing your damage. You can do orange for secondaries if that's how you're doing your damage as well. Generally, I would say Vauban doesn't have any insane synergies, although I can just really strongly recommend 1 casting speed at least. It helps them out a lot, but everything else is totally up to personal taste. So looking at Vauban's build here, there's a lot of options we can go for, but I'm going to quickly kind of cover the core, I believe. I believe that Primed Continuity, Archon Stretch, and Augur Reach are, and Tesla Bank, of course, are basically required on Vauban. Primed Flow is definitely good, but you can use Arcane Battery, actually, with Bastille's armor buff in order to maintain high energy economy. That's not too bad. Umbral Intensify is here to try to negate that overextended, along with Molt Augmented. Fast Deflection is here because this is a shield-taking build, and it makes Pillage feel a whole lot better. Cutting Drift is here for extra range, because I do believe it's worth it, and Corrosive Projection helps accelerate the efficiency of my defense strip. So, let's talk about it, because I think this is a bit of a valuable conversation here. Overextended is not mandatory. I don't consider it, well, no mod is mandatory, you know what I'm saying. I don't consider Overextended to be core on Vauban, but the fact that Tesla Bank scales with it for a 22-meter nuke is absolutely insane. Not only are we CCing more of the map with each Bastille, which with each Tether Flechette, and Photon Strike also scales with range, although it's not as big of a deal because usually when you're using Photon Strike, you're grouping with the Vortex, so it's not nearly as big of a deal, but you know, it's just more benefits, right? In my opinion, because of the way Tesla Bank scales with range, and the fact that it's always dealing the enemy's health as damage, it's just absolutely worth going in. 22-meter nuke, basically, especially if you kill a tankier target and you have armor stripped, which again will be pretty easy because this is a Pillage build, because I have Corrosive Projection, because I have a Steel. So with Aegis, with Fast Deflection, and with Pillage, we are basically unkillable in most content via shield tanking. It's a little bit elementary, I know. Obviously, you can health tank on Vauban, you can armor tank if you want, you can shield gate. There's plenty of ways to do it. I just think that this is a more like, this is a good independent build, but the full armor strip and the CC and all that with Pillage also allows for a more supportive playstyle. I strongly recommend giving it an attempt to invest in strength more. It's just that for me, my Helminth option doesn't really scale with strength very much. Like, sure, I lose some damage on Overdriver. Technically, my strip per second is quite awful. It's at 10 per second right now. This will get higher when I stack Molt Augmented. But because I have Pillage and because I have Corrosive Projection, that slow strip on Bastille, which I really think its buff base number should have been buffed, but whatever, will just be so much faster and so much more efficient. So this is my build that I use personally, but really the core you want is max range, decent duration. I could go for more here if I wanted to. Efficiency, you can tank. If you're going like a Spectro Siphon build, you could definitely just take Blind Rage and say screw it. And then strength, again, it kind of depends on the Helminth option you're opting for, but I think Vauban is super easy to build. Just go for max range and just kind of find how you're going to survive. So usually that'll be like, you know, Null Star, Eclipse, Pillage, Blood Altar if you want. You know, there's multiple ways to survive, but just know that within Vauban's own kit, it's a little risky to just rely on the CC because overguarded enemies do exist, nullifiers do exist, and it can get a little bit scary. So I recommend just, again, apply these core mods of Continuity, Stretch, Reach, and Tesla Bank, build some survivability, and the rest, it's the world's your oyster, basically, from that point onwards. And additionally, if you are someone who uses Photon Strike, which I don't, I do consider Photon Repeater to basically be mandatory on that build. It is just so strong. Add that to Tesla Bank, and that's 2 core augments, which sucks, but that build is really strong. I strongly recommend Photon Repeater if that's the kind of playstyle you use. When we're talking about synergies, Vauban has a lot of options with just pure loadout stuff, right? So here's the Ogress, obviously with Vortex and Napalm. This is just a really strong option. I didn't have to tell you that. One of my personal favorites is going to be the Coda Base Assist, along with the Archoplasmor. Pretty basic, high punch through weapons that work really well with Vauban's Vortex, but also work really well in that kind of isolated play. One thing that I use very, very often is the Stalta. So the Stalta works really well for my playstyle, but additionally, also works well for the Vortex playstyle, even though I don't use it because it has that alt fire. It really strong. Another one I recommend is like something like a Toncore. Any kind of AoE weapon works, Exceltra if you wanted to, but because of Tesla Bank, you're actually able to use things like the AX52, the Batacore. Any more single target emphasized weapon still works really well. You just have to be a little bit more mindful of those Tesla Bank marks, and you will have an excellent time. The compressor here is a primer. It's more for the fashion here, this like kind of tech fit I've got going on, but I can recommend a couple things. For example, the Vasto or Lex, these really hard hitting secondaries, popping secondary fortifier and the magnetic might mod on there to just instantly remove like one bullet will remove like all the overguard from a target, and that will subject them to the rest of your kit, which means they're going to be harmless again. That's kind of your goal with a secondary, is either a primer or something that will easily remove a bunch of overguard from enemies, because they're, especially in the higher level content, there's going to be more of it, but provided you have something like this on you, looks super sick as well. Provided you have something like this on you that can remove the overguard, you can also steal that overguard using secondary fortifier, which gives Vauban that extra layer of survivability that he definitely would want. Melees, Vauban doesn't really use much in the way of melees. I use a gunblade here because it's really fun, but uniquely, he actually is really good with the Zenistar. You can basically build it up because Vortex enables ground finishers. You can build up melee crescendo, and you can get like a 2-minute or 3-minute, I forget, disc that either primes or deals a bunch of damage within your Vortex, within your area, and it's honestly really fun and really strong. Is it worth the setup? I'm gonna say no personally, but if you have fun that way, you should absolutely go for it. Otherwise, standard gunblade, ceramic dagger on you, movement stuff like the Praetos is obviously going to be a great choice. Strongly recommend. For focus school, I'd say Zeneric is probably, I forgot to change my pairs on this character, whoops. Anyways, for focus schools, there's a lot of choices, but I would generally say just Zeneric is fine. Vauban has good energy econ with Archon stretch, but if you don't have that, Zeneric will bail you out quite a bit. There is no wrong option here. Vazarin, if you want to, be more survivable. If you want more damage, Matter Eye is great. Matter Eye plus Vortex is insane. Obviously, like the focus ults aren't the most reliable parts of a gameplay loop, but Vauban makes really good use of them because he groups so effectively. So focus schools, really anything you want here is good. Let's talk about how to actually play Vauban. I'm going to be separating this into two parts. This is something kind of new for my guides. Core gameplay, which I think shouldn't be strayed from too far for the best outcomes, and gameplay recommendations, which are more like my personal taste. For core gameplay, I would say to lead with your Overdrive or Vector Pad. This gives you some solid stats to start off any mission, move faster, deal more damage. Really simple. You're going to want to manage this ability properly, casting it whenever the buff expires. This, combined with your passive, gives you a ton of extra upfront damage and lets you move around a whole lot quicker. Next, Tesla Nervos. It might be tempting to cast Tesla Nervos right off rip, but the truth is, it's pretty likely the little balls are going to get lost, stuck, or latched to enemies you aren't currently engaged with and maybe might never be. Tesla Bank is a very core part of dealing out damage, especially in terms of AoE, so even 1 or 2 Tesla Nervos getting lost somewhere heavily decreases the quality of your gameplay. Wait to cast Tesla Nervos when you are approaching enemies in the direction of your actual engagement or objective. I would recommend getting a Bastille up the second you start to take any heavy damage, or once you find the location you want to play around, objective or otherwise. Does a room not have a Bastille in it? Yes, it does. Bastille is your first layer of survivability. First the CC, then the armor. Vauban's unique targeting of his abilities allows him to throw utility across rooms freely, so try to stay ahead of where you're moving and be active. Keep in mind where Bastille is, where it isn't, and where it's gone down and collapsed into a vortex, or keep in mind how to manually time out the vortex collapse so you get the most duration out of your crowd control. In regard to Tether Flechette, it has very basic applications and also a few more advanced ones. Obviously, you can use them as a stationary grappling turret that groups, and you would have done a pretty good job for yourself. However, in my view, the best application is using Tether to manipulate enemy movement, or lack thereof, limiting their movement. Tether can be used to effectively extend Bastille's range by throwing it towards the outer ring of your Bastille, which grapples the enemies inwards with the tether, drops them off in the Bastille containment field, and increases the limit back to 2, so you can keep grabbing enemies and putting them into Bastille, which effectively doubles the radius of your Bastille, as the range on Tether Flechette Orb is basically as long as the radius of Bastille. Very, very strong. Additionally, if you are playing a more stationary playstyle, you can use Tether to pull enemies into your line of sight, or maybe around a doorway from behind cover, in a situation where you'd otherwise have to wait ages for them to come back from their spawn location, lowering KPM. Again, the way it works, if you're at a stationary objective, enemies are taking forever to get to you, but you have to kill them for whatever reason. You have 4 of these Tether Orbs, 4 of these Vortexes. It's very easy to pull enemies where you need them to go. Likewise, you can kind of use, since Bastille has no line of sight check, you can use tactical placings of your Bastille and your Tether Orbs to get enemies right precisely where you want them to be. And I'm not going to pretend that players actually do this, most don't, but it is a high level application of Vauban's kit that, while isn't necessary in current Warframe, there could be a meta where the game slows down a bit and a strategy like this with proper positioning is required. Photon Strike is a simple damage ability, so use it in combination with Tether and Vortex, maybe use it to try to nuke out overguarded enemies, and you're guaranteed good outcomes. It's a fun ability to use. Photon Repeater is incredibly potent, especially with Vortex. It's really strong. Any situation where you would use Vortex, you're probably going to end up using a lot of Photon Strikes. It's really strong. It's personally not my playstyle, but Photon Strike is absolutely relevant and absolutely a ton of fun to use. Moving on to gameplay recommendations. I recommend learning what combination of Bastille and Vortex you enjoy, whether it's just spamming the Bastille and utilizing the few second auto collapse, just spamming Vortexes off rip and ignoring the defense strip or armor gain. It's easy to maintain the armor gain, but also just play for Vortexes. It's really quite difficult to strip a bunch of armor. You can use a mix of both now, which is really good, but you have to determine how you're going to do that and how you're going to layer those abilities together. You can have a Bastille strip armor while Vortex sucks, but how do you plan on actually mechanically executing that? That's something you're going to want to try to figure out, how to use your fingers properly. Learning the timing on manual Bastille collapse is really important, right? Learning how to leverage these combos to your playstyle and how you want to play, the weapons you've chosen, the helmets you've chosen, stuff like that, is a really good choice. Learn how to use Bastille and Vortex together. That is how you'll get the best outcomes. Vauban has a lot of tools, and you should learn how to use every single one of them. The amount of focus you need to spend on Tesla Bank depends entirely on what your main DPS instruments are. For more standard weaponry like rifles, it's way more important that you focus on Tesla Bank marks, but when you have AoE weapons, you really just don't have to think about it, but just keep Tesla Bank in mind. If you're not dealing as much damage or nuking as hard as you want, just make sure you're killing those Tesla Bank targets. It's incredibly, incredibly important, and make sure you are, again, this is more of a core gameplay thing, but recast Tesla coil or Tesla Nervos. You really will have to recast, even if you have 4 balls out with a bunch of charges, right? It really doesn't matter. If the Tesla Nervos are not near you, you cannot benefit from Tesla Bank. It's just how it works. Lastly, get better at understanding the arc and distance of Vauban's throwable abilities. That's 75% of his kit, more arguably, depending on how you see it, along with their effective ranges once they're deployed. It's really a unique strength of his. He can operate from so far away with such effective long-range abilities. To less experienced players, the way his balls work, for lack of a better verbiage, is a little clunky. And I agree, it can sometimes definitely feel clunky, but to an experienced Vauban player, you turn this downside into an insane upside, an insane advantage, and lets you dominate more of the map than probably any other frame in the game. Vauban is a frame who's always been kind of hard to give a real ranking to because his 2 biggest problems were never really his own fault. The game slowly made him more outdated, and the game slowly phased him out in 2 separate ways. The meta, of course, as the game became so much faster and damage-centric, CC, Overguard, the whole shebang, there's been video essays made on it ad nauseum, but also his kit just fell off. There were stupid things like Bastille's target cap, the clunkiness of his 2, things that weren't really his fault. His kit became outdated and the concept at the same time became outdated. And so how are you supposed to assess a frame when his failures are just not really on him? And with the Vauban rework, I can safely say that even though you know, a lot of the CC problems and the override problems exist, Vauban's kit actually feels amazing to play and execute. Vauban is a frame I would define as definitely 100% not for everyone. But if you enjoy that kind of tactician, zoning, area denial, you know, a little 4-head, 5-head play style, I think that Vauban's going to do a lot for you. Granted, I do think that there's going to be weaknesses, especially towards later game, that you need to play for, or certain situations you need to play for and be very wise about. But that's part of playing a Warframe. That's part of quote unquote maining a Warframe, getting good at a Warframe, is understanding when they're weak and when, you know, you can just play them with your brain off, right? And that's going to be a very wide spectrum from frame to frame, but ultimately I think Vauban is a frame who will do beginners a lot of good pre-steel path. I think this frame pre-steel path is one of those broken things in the world, but post-steel path you really need to start applying yourself, you know, secondary fortifiers, arcane circumvents, good like smart Helminth options, good builds, knowing what you're doing, placing your abilities properly, being very active. But overall I think Vauban is super good, and while I would never call him meta, I do think that Tesla Bank and the level scaling damage and just the sheer volume of CC, the area Vauban can cover, being probably the best frame in the game for that. Yeah, I'm not gonna like snuff him out of anything. This frame is incredibly good. I just wouldn't say he's for everyone, and if you want to really apply him at the same level that some of the kind of brain dead stronger frames, you know, Mirage, the Sarens, if you want any kind of outcome like that, you will have to have an incredibly active playstyle, know what you're doing, and even then it might not be achievable. That's okay, because not every frame is meant to do what they do. What Vauban does is unique, the way he does it is unique, and I think the skills that you need to apply are very unique to Vauban and will make you an overall better Warframe player for, you know, the vast future. So I think you should give Vauban an absolutely try. There's just nothing to lose. Give him a Nightwave, it's super easy. His design is sick, heirloom skin is sick. There's a lot of things to like about Vauban, and you should absolutely give him a shot. There's nothing to lose. Thank you guys for watching. Much love. Sorry for the wait on this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.